Thank you. So, yes, James and I will be sharing this presentation, and just at the start I'd like to also acknowledge Steve Cave, who's our Regional Parks Manager and who manages the Regional Park at Tutira. So I'll just do some scene setting and then hand over to James. So our Regional Council is involved in planting in a number of ways. We encourage planting on farmland to do with erosion control, and that's mainly poplar and willow space planting. Also regarding nutrient loss from land and trying to reduce those losses, we get involved in wetland and riparian planting. And then the council also owns some land themselves. And so our operations group is involved in willow planting and some native planting in the river reserve areas for the purpose of flood control and taking care of the stop banks. We also have regional parks, and we're balancing a whole lot of values in those parks. So there's recreational use, there's erosion control in some cases. We're considering those multiple values. So all planting, for whatever initial reason we're doing it, can achieve multiple benefits. So this is Lake Tutira on a good day, and if you drove here from the south and passed through Napier, Tutira is on the eastern side of the main road, about 40 minutes north of Napier. This is Tutira on having a bad day, and you can see some of the issues that we have to deal with there around erosion and soil loss into the lake, and there have actually been quite a few studies on the sediment in the lake because it's a pretty effective sediment trap to study. And this is Tutira having a different sort of bad day, where we see the algal bloom and the effects of that sediment and the nutrients that are released from it, causing that algal bloom. I did ask for the worst, ugliest photo that we had, so it's not representative, it's just to prove a point. So this area on the right is the area that the council owns, so we own really a significant part of that, that land surrounding the lake. And the council acquired that in 1998. The primary objective was to try and reduce soil erosion and reduce that sediment entering the lake. So some of the values that we have to balance and have to consider when we're managing this area, particularly soil conservation, number one, and recreational values for people using the lake for fishing and other things, camping, those sorts of things. There are also some of these other things: return on investment, heritage and culture, education and innovation, which James will cover later on. So I'll hand over to you now, James.
Thanks, Brendan. So I turned up to work for the Regional Council 2.5 years ago from a pretty indoctrinated forestry and farming background. And I certainly had this question for myself: how did the council end up owning 130 hectares of manuka? And there's many strands to the web, or heads to the monster, or however you want to put it, but hopefully there'll be some clarity about that when I finish. But we are similar to Jeremy's situation. We've planted about 160,000 hectares, 1,000 plants on 130 hectares, including some blanking. It's at 3x3 spacing, so that's 1,100 plants to the hectare. And we're in an agreement with Comvita, so we're using Comvita stock, which Jonathan will talk about the details of a bit more later, but the idea is to have some material that's been selected for high quality honey production, but also some variability around timing of flowering, and hopefully these things are all going to come together and improve our understanding of what happens with a manuka plantation and making it as productive as possible. So the seedlings, a bit hard to see, but down on the left, they're coming to the forest to be planted about the length of a pencil in a small root trainer, and probably about 4 mils at the root collar, and still quite whippy, not much bark on them. So quite a fragile little critter to put out there, and no protection at all in terms of physical barriers to pest problems, so certainly one of our challenges here. Been planted across 3 years. This is a 5 hectare initial trial that was planted 3 years ago, and it's was basically a proof of concept. Were they still alive, or we're going to do more? So in the second year we did 45 hectares, and then last winter we planted a further 80 hectares, so for a total of 130. And in the country park context, it's hastened the option for retirement for those steep escarpment pieces of land that you can see there. The intention always was for the protection of the lake catchment and water quality that would occur. When the Manuka opportunity came along and we were able to establish quite economically a native species on that escarpment, that was one reason that it was so much so much encouragement within council to get this done. There's a multiple use intent for this park, as Brendan alluded to. Lots of recreation and a growing presence of recreational people, so our first mountain bike event coming up, but also a lot of camping around the lakeshore and a lot of walking. So there's walking tracks established within the park, and part of the planting plan was to retain the vistas that exist there, so there's some open ground deliberately left there as well. So in a regional context, Hawke's Bay Regional Council encompasses about 300,000 hectares of farmland that's in the extremely vulnerable class 6 and 7, very erodible. And in the last few years, there was a Trees on Farms project was launched. The initial thrust of that was to use return from carbon revenue to offset the establishment cost, with council stumping up planting costs and recovering that investment through carbon. The idea was to improve farm and community resilience, so a lot of these properties that have some part that really isn't productive for farming, but the farmer can't fund a retirement option for themselves. The idea was to institute a program that was going to allow this to happen, and at the initial stages there was going to be up to 47 million invested across 30,000 hectares, with a return of that investment to come from low-risk carbon. And obviously at the time that the project was mooted, carbon was about $20 a tonne and everyone was very excited about it. And as we did due diligence, that carbon price slid away to where it is today. And so this project's been parked, but it's fair to say that the Manuka option kept everyone very excited, so the potential for a small carbon return, but also to make things better for the bees, and also provide a honey revenue, and to provide those farmers who preferred the concept of establishing native back on that land. It was very exciting, and so there's still a lot of interest and momentum around the Manuka for that reason. And hopefully the handbrake comes off if we can find another way to fund at least part of a program like this. So part of our involvement in the Manuka, obviously, is this proof of concept of the idea for a wider Trees on Farms style initiative, but also in the business case sense of being able to plant Manuka for a definite return. We're really interested in being able to prove the concept and get Manuka successfully and reliably established at a reasonable cost, and then to be able to see how the honey revenues pan out, and then be able to demonstrate that for landowners who may want another option. So a lot of interest in the establishment processes. Is this a good way to get Manuka out of a nursery and established? And how do we cope with all of the challenges that are a little bit more acute than for a plantation radiata type resource? So we're planting in a similar style 1-year-old seedling, but it's quite a lot softer than a radiata seedling. It's less than a mouthful for a goat. We've probably shot 700 goats in the immediate neighbourhood to this project over about 2.5 years, and they're still coming. I mean, you count on there being one in there somewhere today, and so we're just really going to have to keep the pressure on that. And also you can see with every mouthful that a goat gets, there's a question around, do we blank or do we live with this as part of the realistic outcomes of establishing Manuka like this? So these are the dilemmas that we're having to work through. We've had survival surveys done. Barry Poole from what was Hardwood Management and now Convita has been advising us on the finer details of getting Manuka established. Had survival surveys done that show 80% survival for the major planting, 2013, which I'm really pleased with. I mean, there's quite a lot of variability in that survival. The heavy goat attack areas have got worse survival than that, and where the soils are deeper and there's a bit of shelter, the survival's much better. So current considerations, things we're working through now. Alignment with the Trees for Bees project. Linda's had 2 visits, I think, to the site now, and we've got another one coming up, and we're working to see how the current tree populations and the variety in the lakeside arboretum is supporting the bee populations currently, and how that calendar's looking, and then how we might supplement that to best support the bee population that's on the property now to harvest the manuka as that comes into an economic age. We've got 3 hive sites there, so obviously we'll be working locally to the hives as well with how to make those matches. That's right, so on the lake edge we've got an arboretum which is about 700 examples of 30 species, ranging from oaks to redwoods and some other conifers and all sorts, not all good for bee populations. Quite a large population of existing willow on the lake edge and some managed gorse on the hillsides. Beekeeper pretty quickly told us not to be too harsh with the helicopter when he saw that was up there. And some quite deliberate areas around the campground, particularly where there's a match of amenity with the Trees for Bees opportunity. So looking forward to seeing how this develops. Many human players in this, as well as bees. We've got lots of interest in this from the local stakeholders in the park, but also we've had 3 Farm Forestry Association field visits there now, and there's always a whole lot of interest in the manuka in particular. So thank you.